right here.
I noticed on one of the slides that was up on the monitor, it mentioned extending benefits to students to age 22.
Right.
At one time, we did, Social Security did pay benefits to students up until they were 22, assuming that it would be used to finish college. So is this an adequacy issue that was the basis of a study on the previous repeal of that, or the impact on financing or solvency, or?
It was it was one of the pieces that went into a very desperate situation. And I think in terms of paying for helping students out, I mean, if you look at our nation and the challenges that we face in terms of where education is our future. I mean, we're sort of economically, we're sort of one of the people at the top of the food chain now in terms of the global picture. And the only way we maintain the ability to support our population is that education. That's going to be so key going forward.
Many people's lives back then, and
many
people were surprised to learn that Social Security no longer did that. So that's probably a good move for adequacy.
Personally, I regretted it at the time and would certainly support its return.
Hi, my question's for Mr. Franklin. It sounds like you did your survey during the height of the panic of the financial breakdown. Do you think any of your findings would have been different if you had done your survey 1 or 2 years before?
I do. I don't think it would be significantly different, but I think that we saw a real bump in the concern over, say, a couple years ago. I mean, but there is some. We have some memory of a Social Security legislative fight in 2005, in which, in an effort to cut benefits and make some changes, was reacted to very strongly against by the American people. So I think that 2 years ago, and I hate to speculate what the data would look like. I think that most of the themes that we pulled out would be similar, but I would say that the interest and concern would be higher, and the threat of populism that we saw is probably more intense. We have seen a spike in that theme typically, certainly over the last year.
Question? Question right down here.
John Tambernino, Social Security Administration. I'd like to return to SSI and disability. SSI and SSDI are both increasing rapidly in terms of expenditures and in terms of the roles, driven in part by demographics, also changes in the labor market, apparently encouraging people to apply for disability, and changes in the program. SSI doesn't raise the questions of solvency, really, in that it's funded differently, but SSDI does, and it's approaching insolvency much more quickly than the retirement program. So I guess a comment to think about this, but the question is, have you guys thought about SSDI and solvency issues, since that you do see an urgency there, I think, that you don't see with the retirement program.
I would start by indicating that this report doesn't spend a lot of time on the disability program. This report deals with vulnerable populations, and I would argue that within the context of looking at long-term solvency, the same issues apply. If we are going to find a way to deal with the financing and the solvency of the disability side, the DI side, that we need to be looking at adequacy for particular populations. The same issues apply. This really hasn't done a lot on this. This report hasn't done a lot on this yet, but what about those 61-year-olds, particularly if we're looking at changes that may affect that particular population in terms of retirement benefits? So is there a need to look at the DI program? Of course, just like there is the retirement system. But the same mantra that I think I've now said about 8 times, I think applies here as well. How do we look at particular vulnerable populations within the DI system, particularly given the changes that may be proposed, and how do we make sure that we address those as well? So twin challenges in the DI program, twin challenges in the retirement program. But I think that we need to do work. During my time as commissioner, I tried starting up some of the work looking at that vulnerable group of 60-year-old, roughly, group. I think more work needs to be done in that area as well, because that is one of the vulnerable populations I think that's in need of focus.
I couldn't agree more. And just as a little PR, we have a flyer in your folders of a seminar that NASI is putting on in November that is focusing on the disability program, not necessarily the solvency issue, but sort of insights from the workers' compensation program for Social Security disability. And one of the interesting questions there is, while Social Security disability claims and spending have been rising in recent years, workers' comp has been going in the other direction. And so we're trying to understand what that is about and what the interaction of the two programs mean.
Steve, back there.
Steve Goss from Social Security. Given that SSI has sort of come up a couple of times in questions, I think just a little footnote on SSI might be useful. SSI, as Virginia mentioned before, it's the $2,000 asset limit has been just fixed over time, and so that's been sort of holding down the ability of the program to really do as much as it used to years ago. But there's another aspect of SSI benefits. The federal benefit rate is indexed over time only by the cost of living. And as a few people have mentioned, historically, and the trustees believe in the future, so does CBO and OMB, that there will be real growth faster than prices in incomes and even in retirement incomes in the future. Certainly the current Social Security benefit formula has the benefits growing faster than just prices. Well, what that means is with the SSI benefit level only growing with prices, it's shrinking relative to all other sources of income. And over time, it'll become a smaller and smaller benefit, and it'll gradually sort of go away. I believe, and there are other people in the room who know a lot better than I do, that, for instance, of the elderly, I think another price-indexed item, which is the poverty levels, I think we have somewhere on the order of 10% of the elderly today under poverty, but if you look at it 50 years out in the projection, it's only 2 or 3%. But that's simply because incomes tend to rise faster than prices over time. But the poverty level and the SSI benefit levels grow only with prices, at least so far.
So it's really the index itself is what is pushing the numbers. Yeah. Any more questions? Okay. Thank you very much. I will remind you of the blue paper in your packet. We're looking for comments and we're looking for ideas. And there's what's back there, a box or something? There's a box that says drop evaluations here. Great big box. Thank you all very much for coming. Thank you for your patience and being here. Hope to see you again.